Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shared Stories. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shared Stories. This is the second film in our series, and I'm so pleased to have this wonderful panel with us, including the director of Shared Legacies, the African American Jewish Civil Rights Alliance, Shari Rogers. I'd also like to welcome 3 members of ADL's Black Jewish Alliance. We have all 3 founding members with us, and James Elam is going to be our moderator. Can you say hi, James?
Hello, everyone.
And we also have Blaine Stoddart, who is part of the founding leadership of this organization. Can you say hi, Blaine?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
And we have the wonderful director of this incredible, powerful film that is so pertinent right now, so important, and we very much value that you put this out into the world. Shari, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so just to let the audience know, we're on Crowdcast, which allows us to have 3 panelists at a time. So once I disappear, you're going to hear from our moderator, James, Blaine, and director Shari. And probably 20 minutes into the conversation, we're going to bring another founding member of ADL's Black Jewish Alliance in Lisa Finkelstein. So I hope you all enjoy the conversation. I'll be back later on to say bye and thank you, and enjoy.
So, Shari, I'll start by saying that it's fantastic to meet you. Can everyone hear me okay? Just great.
Yeah, we can hear.
Yes.
Excellent. So I will start by expressing some of the emotion that I felt from seeing your film. We started the Black and Jewish Alliance at the Anti-Defamation League around 3 years ago. And we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what we were getting into, but we knew that there was something that had to be reconnected between the Black and the Jewish communities. And so we started with that premise. Let's figure this out along the way. And we developed relationships. We worked together to learn about each other and to grow. And honestly, I look at your film as what should be considered to be necessary. And I'm a filmmaker, and your film I consider to be necessary for African Americans. I think it's necessary for the Jewish community. I think it's necessary for Americans. I think that the historical perspective is so well laid out. I think that it is so completely and effectively premised so that you cannot help but to understand the exact message of the film and the history that does exist between the Black community and the Jewish community, that I wish we would have had this when we started the organization.
Thank you so much.
So I'll start by saying thank you. Thank you for your work and the very obvious level of homework and diligence and passion that it took to pull this together. I consider myself to be a very learned person. I consider myself to be a student of history and media, and I couldn't stop watching because every moment I felt as though I was learning. And so I'm going to ask this question of the other panelists, but I need to ask this of you. I need this asked of you. How do you feel about your film, given that both John Lewis and C.T. Vivian passed away this week?
Well, first of all, I consider... Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you. I
Okay,
apologize,
first of all-
Shari. Do me a favor, Blaine. Would you do me a favor, Blaine? Would you put it on mute for 1 second?
Okay, all right, no problem. How do I do this? How do I mute? I don't know how to mute. I'll turn mine down.
I think there's a background noise. You should be able to easily mute your microphone. There's an ambient noise. There you go. Thank you so much, Blaine.
Okay. First of all, if you can hear me, I'm so grateful. Can you hear me?
Shari, we can hear you wonderfully, and you actually
Okay,
don't
thank you.
really have to even speak as loud as you were speaking. We hear you fantastically.
Okay. First of all, I'm deeply touched by your reaction to the film, and I'm almost in shock, even though we all knew that Congressman Lewis had cancer and C.T. Vivian, I think he would be 95 next week. I felt like I got to know them, and I call them, I really would call them spiritual warriors, warriors and fighters for social justice. And what's amazing is that, you know, when I just interviewed Congressman Lewis about 4 or 5 months ago, the warmth he had, the humbleness, like everybody describes him. You wouldn't think he was a giant the way he was. He made me feel so comfortable, and so he was just a lovely man. And Reverend C.T. Vivian, with his smile and his graciousness, and you know, they're just, you know, their being was exemplified. Even at this late stage, what kind of human beings they were. They were just dignified people, made me feel dignified. So I think America and the world lost 2 great warriors. I have a theory, which I could be totally wrong, but since Congressman Lewis was very ill at the end, when he heard that Reverend C.T. Vivian, and if he was still had consciousness, he must have maybe let go or something, because they were such a tight-knit, they were so tight-knit, the 2 of them, but the whole group was, the whole inner circle of the civil rights movement, you know, they had to go together. So I just feel honored to know them, and deeply, deeply upset by their loss. But at the same time, thank God we're carrying their legacy, not only what they contributed to the world and American history, but what they also contributed to the African American Jewish Coalition.
Sure, and again, it was, you know, there's a book that my favorite book is the Tao Te Ching, and it opens with words can name no lasting words, and I don't have words to name my emotions when I saw them open your film. So, I mean, I will leave it stand at that. I mean, it was such a powerful moment for me and for the world, and I am excited about people seeing your work.
Thank you so much.
So, I apologize in that my questions perhaps are not linear, in that I wrote them based on my feelings after the film. So, one of the more poignant moments to me was the moment when you talked about freedom caps. And that was something that was a completely new concept to me. So I would like for you to briefly, or you can talk as long as you would like. I mean, it's your film, quite honestly. But I would love for you to expound upon that concept and what it meant to those that you captured.
Well, first of all, I think that particular piece in the film was from Rabbi Saul Berman, who's an Orthodox rabbi, actually, at Columbia University in New York. And what's so interesting is that, to me anyways, is that we never really hear from Orthodox Jews that were a part of the civil rights movement. So it was fascinating to me to interview him. Dr. Susanna Heschel had told me that he was that he was involved in the civil rights movement and knew her father. So I contacted him. And I think what really struck me was, I just want to go back a little bit. I started filming the film at the 50th anniversary from the Selma to Montgomery March. And Rabbi Saul Berman actually showed some contrition, because he said, you know, it's really too bad that it took the 50th anniversary from the Selma and Montgomery March for me to start talking about my own personal experience in Selma. He said, he's so involved with teaching and ethics and this and that, but he actually was apologetic. So sometimes we don't, I think it highlighted for me the importance of anniversaries and the importance of commemorating them, because I think that particular anniversary, sparked a lot of people that were involved at that time to realize how important it was, and that it's a teaching moment for American history and for the Jewish people, for all people. But his particular experience was when he got there with many rabbis, he saw many of the Black Americans wearing these caps, these freedom caps, and apparently many of the Jewish people that were coming from the north to Selma were wearing these caps and talking about the Exodus story. So they wanted to have one as well. He goes into talk about witnessing murders there and how he was in prison, and it was Purim, and there was a lot of Jews that were in the prison with him, but weren't there because of religious reasons. They were some younger people there, and he was actually explaining the Queen Esther story, and I don't know, it's just amazing just to hear his personal stories. But I think what struck me the most was how sorry he felt that he had to wait to see this as a teaching moment. I don't know if I answered your question, but
you did, and I'm going to bring Blane in because he's been very patient, and I know that we're almost ready to bring in Lisa, who is also a member of the Black and Jewish Alliance of the ADL. So I want to do one quick housekeeping point. I'm 50 and I can't see too well. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the chat room over there, and I can't see that stuff.
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
So I'm going to take my glasses off,
I'm seeing it.
and I'm going to try to take a peek at some of the chatty stuff. However, the question I want to bring to Blane is, I personally was shocked because, American history is what it is. And that means that you learn what you learn, not the facts. So
Right.
I always understood that African Americans and the Orthodox Jewish community had a strained relationship, but mainly that was because I'm a child of the 80s and I grew up hearing about things that happened in New York and Brooklyn and Bensonhurst and such. So when I see these photos and I see these images and I see these interviews of these people who were there, these very high level Orthodox Jews who were there as part of the struggle. Blane, I want to know what you think of that contribution and those images as well. And sorry for reading, but I'm going to read these little quotes with my glasses off so I can try to figure out what's going on. So Blane, you can answer that, please.
And the chat room, by the way, my name is Blaine Stoddart. I run BFW Group. We're a construction project management company, and we're at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. And 3 years ago, I went to an ADL meeting with my mentor, a man named Bill Sasso, who runs a law firm, Stradley Ronan. And at that meeting, Nancy Barron Beer got up and talked about anti-Semitism and how the ADL was working against anti-Semitism. But then she pivoted and started talking about racism. And here I am in a room with 500 people, and I'm the only black. And here goes Nancy Barron Beer, the director of the ADL, talking about racism. So after the meeting, I contacted her and says, why don't we have, I didn't even know the ADL was fighting hate against Jews, but also fighting hate against all other peoples in America. So I contacted her and I said, why don't the blacks and the Jews have an alliance? I knew that 52 years ago that Martin Luther King, before he died, had worked with the Jews from 1958 to 1968, those 10 years. And the greatest civil rights achievements were during that time. This film, Shari, let me thank you. This film bears that out. And we have to
Blane, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm going to. You're speaking very loud and we can hear you so clearly.
Okay, all right, let me okay, let me just, this film bears out clearly how the coalition was built with Martin Luther King and the Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community, and the moderate rabbi community. And I have to watch the film again because there's so many facts. There's so many nuggets. There's a part in the film, Shari, where you talk about Martin Luther King walks into this room and there's this Jewish rabbi convention. And he's surrounded by 1,000 rabbis singing, "We shall overcome" in Hebrew. I mean, just amazing stuff. When Martin Luther King needed financing, how the Jewish community came and to find out that the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was primarily financed by the speaking fees of Martin Luther King and Jewish money. And I knew that it was there. And I knew that after Martin Luther King died, that the coalition quickly broke down because there were more radical elements. But here we are, 2 generations later. We've missed, let's assume that every 20 years is a generation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are 2.5, almost 3 generations since the breakdown of this coalition. And Shari, I'm going to ask you so I don't know where you live, I don't know where you come from, I don't know your ethnic background, but I'm going to ask you to become a part of this movement because we have to revive this movement now because our enemies, when they fight, when the racists fight and when the supremacists fight, they're going after blacks and Jews, and yet our coalition has broken apart. And yeah, we want to talk about Palestine, and yeah, we want to talk about what Jesse Jackson says, but that's not the point. We don't have to agree on everything to form an alliance. You don't marry somebody because you agree with them. I know husband and wives that have been married for 50 years. They fight every day. Well, not physically, but they don't agree on everything. The racism and the anti-Semitism that we now face, we must rebuild this coalition. And I think that this film that you have made is almost like what we, as the catalyst, it's the catalyst that we've been looking for to rebuild this coalition. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry I'm talking so fast. I'm sorry I'm talking so loud, but I'm excited about the film. I'm excited about correcting all the misinformation on Fox and CNN because they only show when we're not working together and when we're fighting in the streets. But there's so much history. There's so much of an alliance between us that is criminal for us not to work together. And we have to rebuild this coalition. And as you can see, like the Black Lives Matter movement, it's going to be from the bottom up. It's going to be from the bottom up. And so we as free thinking blacks and Jews must come together to rebuild a coalition. We must come together to fight against anti-Semitism. We must come together to fight against 400 years of racism in America against blacks and people of color. And we're hoping that this film is a catalyst for that. And I'm done. I can't remember the question that James asked me.
Where's James? Where's James? We don't see you. James,
Really?
Thank you so much. We lost James.
How did you lose me?
I don't know. We don't see you. We're waiting
Okay,
for
James, keep talking, please. Go ahead.
Can you guys not see me?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
maybe you shook your mouth.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you.
gotcha.
You sounded a little bit like Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. And why we see him a lot on the news. I don't know if you know Dr. Michael Eric Dyson.
Yeah, I saw him in the film.
Yeah, he's just in the film briefly, but I've got hours on him. He's such a cool speaker, and he's so brilliant, and he's from Michigan. But, people would be shocked. We lost him again. But people would be shocked to know that he thinks this history is so important that he's been teaching this history at HBCUs. So, I mean, there's so much information that we don't know. We hear, like you said, I'm going to echo what you say. We hear the negative things. Of course, this is a part love story, I think, between us. It doesn't mean that we didn't have our differences. There doesn't mean that, Jews have, when they came to America, we came here willingly. Blacks brought here unwillingly. Okay.
Right.
And, there are differences. But there's enough of a common allyship.
Yes.
That I think what's so amazing is, as much as I've captured in terms of the Lions, if you will, their personal memories of the Black Jewish Coalition. Hello?
Yes, he's back. Yep.
As much as that's just the tip of the iceberg.
It is.
That's what's it's the tip. So let me give you an example. When Congressman John Lewis, when one of the times I was filming him, I was Sherry Frank, who's amazing, and I would consider her Congressman Lewis's soul sister. That's for sure. So she brought me to the Jewish Women's Foundation, a meeting. There must have been hundreds of Jewish women from every state in the United States. When we showed a clip of the film, and afterwards, Congressman Lewis was singing "Happy" and just surrounded by the love of the Jewish people for Congressman Lewis. Basically, every person was coming up to me from each state. I've got a story. I've got a story. I've got a story. Like, my dad was involved in, helping make sure that, we could cross the Selma Bridge. And my dad was, there's stories from every single state. Wow. So that's what this kind of reminds me of, not to compare myself at all to what happened with Schindler's List, but Schindler's List kind of sparked the foundation that basically then took testimonies from all the living witnesses to the Holocaust. Well, I think we need testimonies to the living witnesses to American history of the coalition of this important transformation of basically, a horrible thing that America did to the African Americans and the Black Americans.
Well, can I jump in, please? There's such an important point you just made right there, because not only is it something that I've thought about historically, but your film reiterated the fact that there are these people whose faces are in, like, lots of Black people who have been in and involved with civil rights violations, lynchings, burnings, bombings, etc., have been interviewed. But there are literally thousands of smiling faces that have never spoken. And a lot of photos, positive and negatives. I don't mean just the freedom fighters. I'm talking about the people, like, there are people in your film who were holding up signs. Like, where are those people now? And everyone knows who they are. But you never see any of these people speak out.
I couldn't even get I interviewed a freedom fighter. She's a woman who had read, I think it was the Exodus story or whatever, and saw Emmett Till's picture on the television, and she was so upset that she, as a young Jewish girl around 18, got involved and was in jail for 40-50 days. There's story upon stories that are just that I couldn't get them all in. So we have hours upon hours of stories. So yes, we've had disconnection and we've had other issues, and we can talk about why we're not exactly the same, but there's enough of a shared common bond. So let me just let's go back up for one moment. So, what's amazing to me is when Dr. Susanna Heschel talks about her father, who, his sisters were murdered in Nazi Germany, and he came from a Hasidic, the highest level of Orthodox rabbis. So he comes to America, and she said her father could have not got out of bed. It's hard enough to have one person murdered out of your family. He had, 3 sisters murdered. Wow. But basically, he goes to the first conference in Chicago. It was a clergy conference where this is where Rabbi Heschel meets Dr. King. And he basically says, in front of everybody, Rabbi Heschel says, it was easier for the Israelites to cross the Red Sea than it is for Negroes to cross a college campus. Yep. And how upsetting it was. Okay, so he was able to take, this rabbinical scholar was able to take the Exodus story and bring it right down to where we needed to, to talk about facts on the ground in America that were disgusting. Sure. So.
Shari, I'm going to say I have to jump off so that Lisa can come on because we're over our time. But I just want to say this. Let us commit. I'm asking all of us to commit. I don't care what group you're in, whether American Jewish Coalition or ADL, that maybe we can start. Our goal with the Black Jewish Alliance is to start with the ADL in New York and other cities and set up chapters around the country. But with your film, we have a vehicle. Even if we can get a 15-minute clip of the film, we have a marketing vehicle that we would like to see in every classroom, in every synagogue, in every church, just for people to look at this film and discuss it. And we're going to talk to the ADL about making that happen in Philadelphia and South Jersey and Delaware. that's our scope, and hopefully we can take this to New York, which is next on our in our sights in terms of forming a strong Black Jewish coalition, because a lot of groups are headquartered in New York. But I just want to thank you. I don't know how
Thank
they're going
you.
to take. I don't know how they're going to take me off, James, and put on Lisa.
How about this? Yapple dapple. It worked. And so, Shari, you could not have given a better segue to my next question, because I honestly don't recall the gentleman's name who spoke the words, but he ended a long statement basically saying exactly what you were saying, essentially saying, speaking the history of the Jewish peoples, recognizing the history of African American peoples, and saying, this is what it means to be a Jew. If you can't see this, then you're not paying it. Like, he basically said, you don't understand what it is to be a Jew if you don't see that this is what we study and what we work for as a people.
You know who that was, which is amazing? That was musician Peter Yarrow. Do you remember at the March on Washington? That was Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Right,
so
that
was
part.
Peter.
Right, sure.
That was Peter, but that was also he said we have the Passover dinner every year. So what comes to mind and talk about our own slavery and what our narrative is to be there for the stranger and tikkun olam, and that's what we're all about. That's doesn't mean all Jews are like, but that's the essence if you study it and you apply what you're supposed to study. Doesn't mean all Jews are like that. Just let me qualify. So it's not so.
Of course.
Okay. So, but that was his point. And what's amazing to me is like, I think it was Rabbi Dresner who once said, and I didn't have this in the film, he said Dr. King told him that, what he appreciated also about the Jewish people was that Jews took pride in their history of slavery. They took that pride and said, we were slaves, but on Passover, that means you kind of lay and sit back, like no one's going to ever, make you a slave again, but you have a responsibility not to feel guilty, not to feel victimized, but to be there for other people, to not ever let other people who are enslaved, that's your calling, your responsibility to have empathy and compassion about it. And Dr. Susanna Heschel said, sadly, a week after he was murdered and assassinated, Dr. King, he was supposed to go to the Heschel home for a Passover dinner.
Oh.
So, can you, you get the chills just thinking about that, right? So, and, as now I think schools and now after Mr. Floyd was murdered, I think there's going to be, American history, starting at kindergartens, will be teaching about slavery, that this will not be something to be embarrassed about. This will not be something, this is American history for Black Americans to study, that they have to know that they were brought here, not as free people, like, other people came here as immigrants. They were brought here as slaves, and that this is nothing to be embarrassed about, but they have to know their history and take pride in where they've, where Black Americans have come and how much more we have to go. And Jewish people identify, every year we talk about our 3,000-year history of slavery, how we've been kicked out of other countries and culminating in the Holocaust, but we've been kicked out of other countries. And so even though it's been a 3,000-year history, we think it's important enough to talk about it every year. Okay? So
that's very powerful. Thank you. That's very powerful. Because unfortunately, and Lisa, I want you to do your answer notwithstanding what I'm about to say, please. But a lot of African Americans in particular have a I'm not a victim mentality.
Oops, and he froze. James,
we can't hear you.
Yeah, James, you froze on the I'm not a victim mentality. Well, a couple of things, and I don't know where exactly he was going. Are you back, James? Nope. Okay. What I find fascinating is all the connecting dots of we've got to tell our stories. And at the end, I forget the woman's name, who said we need to, as Blacks and Jews, we've got to carry each other's stories and be with each other deeply. And through the chat, as we've been going on since the beginning, It's what can we do? And I think part of what we can and what we need to do is to deeply, truly listen, not as though you know the answer, but with a really open mind, because we have not lived in each other's shoes. And unless we deeply listen and really commit to that, then we can begin to re-strengthen our bond together, because we have so much shared, stories and experiences, very different, but there's common threads. And I think that does go back to why, as you really call out in your story, why it was so important. And, and it broke my heart to say that, to hear you say that it took 50 years, where we've learned we've got to tell the story every year. And what else can we do so that this story does not wait another 50 years or even another 5 years? And we all know that we must harness this moment without question if we really do want to drive change. And I don't want it to be back what Maya Angelou and David Goodman said around that it takes 2 white people for a black person to be recognized because black life didn't matter. I mean, we're human beings, and this, how dare us, if we know this, we're even committing, just even if it's all that we're committing is tonight to watch the movie and to be part of this discussion, how dare we then leave it and not do something about it?
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. I think that was well said, Lisa. Were you saying something, Shari? Go ahead.
No, I was scratching. Sorry. But no, I definitely echo it. And, I think everybody can do something, and I think this COVID period, combined with what happened to Mr. Floyd and the actual visual watching of a man who's begging for his life for 8 minutes, and they're standing around, it almost was like that picture in the very beginning of Strange Fruit that the song came out of, when a Jewish man, coincidentally, almost put this in the film, was so upset by the picture of black men hanging from a tree. And if you look at the picture closely, there's white people around there, and they're smiling, and they're just looking around like, la 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 da. And he was so struck by that photo that he actually wrote the lyrics to Strange Fruit, which became like the anthem. It's a long story, but the point is, it's not that dissimilar from the disgust of us all watching on TV as we can't breathe in our homes, right? That we're watching Mr. Floyd's, the police officer on the neck of this man, and he's basically saying, I can't breathe, and we're watching it, and people are, the other police are just standing around loudly, and I guess what I'm trying to say is, like the strength of Emmett Till's mother, who, I can't imagine anybody stronger than that left the casket open to let the world see, the pain and what white people did to this, and what racism can do to this man, sparked positivity in the world. And I think what a film can do is seeing the pictures, seeing people's real experiences, real memories, as Dr. Clarence Jones says, if the lions don't tell their stories, the hunters will get all the credit. These are the lions who are witnesses to saying, well, yeah, we experienced tremendous pain, we still do, but Dr. King taught us the power of nonviolence, the power of the strength to love, the power of that every human being has a soul, and that eventually that soul will come to a truth of that we're all interconnected, okay? That if you build the relationship that love will conquer all. And I think that's something that we don't see a lot these days. And I think bringing back Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence and strength to love, and what Rabbi Susanna, what Dr. Heschel talks about, her father talking about the Rebbe's story about, if you don't feel what somebody else feels, if you don't feel that pain, then you're not really in partnership. Then you don't really understand that, we've kind of lost that ability to say that we can't know the other. We're not exactly like the other, but we're all human beings, and we all have the capacity to feel. And if we're in relationship together and we really are listening, then, we have a chance to to feel again, but not to stand, the standing silence, just standing around. It's just unacceptable, you know?
Well, so again, a perfect segue. So, men begging for their lives. One of the more poignant scenes for me in the film was the scene that discussed the men who were liberated from the Holocaust camp by the African American soldiers. And that was their recognition, even then, and their plight, the plight of their liberators. So I wanted you both to maybe perhaps speak a bit about that part of the film.
Well, there's two parts. First of all, that's a Holocaust survivor that survived 5 camps, and his brother was brutally murdered and his father. And I think it was after they were liberated, but when he saw a black soldier, I just think he felt the appreciation, and he just was so emotional about it. And I had the privilege of interviewing Alexis Scott, whose father was the only photographer at Buchenwald who took pictures, and he actually had to put his camera down. I mean, because as she said in the film, it was just so disgusting. But I think we forget that whole when the black soldiers in America, they weren't even treated as equal as soldiers, but they were fighting for their freedom in America and fighting abroad. But yet there was this intersection that brought Mr. Scott eventually to work with the Holocaust Museum, and there was that intersection there that I think is very profound. And I think that any Holocaust survivor, they live their life to try to fight hate wherever it is, because they know when hate goes, without, when people espouse hateful things like Hitler did, even though he might have been trying to protect, empower his people or whatever, we tend to forget that not all evil people are all bad. They can empower people, right? But I think the point is that there was this shared empathy even during Nazi Germany, where black soldiers felt the pain and when they were there. And I think on some level, that's a whole nother story that needs to be more exposed. But I just thought it was important to show that connection. And I think also Bayard Rustin. I mean, when I found out that Bayard Rustin had gone to with Elie Wiesel, and here you can envision Elie Wiesel standing with Bayard Rustin, and Bayard Rustin starts singing "Oh Freedom" right in Buchenwald, or where they were, and they're looking at each other's eyes, and the tears coming together. Like, how powerful can you get than that interchange, right?
Okay, I'm supposed to ask some questions from the audience, and so I'm starting to take my glasses off again to try to go back and dig into this a bit here to see. I'm going to try to grab something from the audience. Okay, here's one. Says certainly only a small number of U.S. Jews/Jewish institutions were involved with the civil rights movement then, or anti-racism now. There is no black community as there is no Jewish community. So what does it mean to have an alliance? And Lisa, I think you'd be well positioned to speak to that.
What does it mean to have an alliance? It means that you've got to care deeply about the mission and be really clear what you're coming together for. What we have learned as the Black Jewish Alliance, it is a very committed group to each other, is first we needed to understand each other's stories and each other's perspectives deeply and truly, and we have to practice that in our meetings to truly listen, and then how can we, leveraging through all of the great work that the ADL does around education and really advocating and speaking out and developing policies to fight hate and prejudice and bias at every turn. So what does it mean to have an alliance? It means that I would say getting really clear and staying true to what are we in existence for. And what we came together for is to reconnect from what used to be. And they talk about it since Martin Luther King and Rabbi Heschel passed, it really started to go away. And what I have learned from my it's hard for me to call it Black colleagues, but I mean, when we formed our coalition, it is the Black Jewish Alliance, and let's get over the political correctness of it. But what I've learned from my Black colleagues on the Black Jewish Alliance is that they've seen us as whites, not as Jews. And it kind of like, because we haven't taken the time to share with each other. And what I said earlier is we've got to learn to truly listen deeply and anew on all sides of the equation. Just like what Shari was saying, not everybody that's bad is fully bad. So we've got to get away from all of this binary thinking as well. I don't know that I've specifically answered the question, but it's a matter of getting commitment. We're very, very clear that it's got to be an equal mix of Blacks and Jews, so that there's never one side of the experiences that override the other. And the Jews stand for the Blacks when there's incidences that occur, and right on back, the Blacks are standing for the Jews when there are, instances of anti-Semitism occurring. But again, we've come together to demonstrate how powerful you can be when you do join, because you're showing that it is about humanity as opposed to a component of who you are, and then hoping that that will spread more beyond just the Blacks and the Jews per se. Does that address them?
No, that's a great answer, Lisa, because the real answer is there is no answer. We're working. And that's really the bottom line, to be positive and to be focused on the mission to develop that alliance. I mean, there is no one answer. There is no blueprint. We're working hard. We spent years trying to collaboratively figure that part out. One of the questions from the audience, for example, questioned levels of anti-Semitism, and I know that's been an issue, especially in the last couple of weeks. There's a lot of anti-Semitism, and I had a conversation with Shira, who is the executive director of the Philadelphia Anti-Defamation League, and I expressed to her, we had just a really heart-to-heart, and I expressed to her, African Americans in particular have had our history aggressively destroyed, whereas the Jewish peoples rely aggressively, and not aggressively, that's the wrong word, heavily on their cultural thought process and their historical thought process. The African American thought process literally has been eviscerated. And so as a result, a lot of people think ridiculous things from a lot of different perspectives. A lot of people are ridiculously right-wing. A lot of people are ridiculously left-wing. People have literally made up. I mean, there's lots of, honestly, I've heard people espouse lots of kinds of crazy things. And I don't think that when Black people say things that Jewish people consider to be anti-Semitic, they're coming from the same root, that it's historically acknowledged by Jewish peoples, but at the same time, it shouldn't be ignored, and it shouldn't be something that we allow to flourish and pretend that it's not something that's very sensitive to the Jewish peoples. And the point is that on both sides, there's an educational process that needs to be undertaken. And that's why we're so excited about this film, Shari, because you laid groundwork so that we don't have to do a whole lot more talking. We can say, see, this is what we're talking about. This is why.
And we need to be reminded as well. And we need to be reminded, what was so beautiful about the film was it laid it very clearly, side by side, so many of the similarities. Mm-hmm. And so much of what it took and what still lies ahead. So I love the way that you really
thank you
pulled it together. Yeah.
Thank you. And,
fantastic.
I just want to add the work that gets done. So, like, for instance, Shari Frank and Congressman Lewis revitalized the Black Jewish Coalition in the 80s. And they had dinners together. They traveled together. They pound the pavement for political things together. Rabbi Saperstein and the building in Washington where the Voting Rights Act happened. I mean, recently, a lot of the rabbis just recently went to jail over different things going on. So there has been, grassroots coalition in different states. David Goodman, when his brother was murdered, he created the Andrew Goodman Foundation. So he's got Blacks and Jews working on college campuses. So when there's voter suppression, they make sure they get out there so that they can make sure that young folks can vote. So they honor his brother, who is 18 years old, was murdered for trying to help Blacks to vote. So he hasn't left it. So there are grassroots organizations. We have continued to work together. And I think what's so great about this virtual and the internet is, and what my organization will be hopefully doing, Spill the Honey, is kind of being an umbrella organization showing all the folks that are doing these work so we can share resources. We got to get away of like who's doing what and the competition. It's all about we got to pull our resources together and get to work, and I think the more we learn about each other state to state, then we can kind of extrapolate what works, whether it's prison reform or working on poverty issues. And this way, some of us are better at doing one thing, another person is better at, doing another, but everybody can do something, and there's enough organizations state to state that we can find our place so we can get something done.
I think that's wonderfully stated by both of you. I'm going to take a last question from the audience. I'm not certain how much more time. Perhaps we have time for more questions, but I'm going to read this question as best I can. I hope that it makes sense. If let me just read it and then we'll go from there. Okay. How do we overcome that elephant in the room, money and power, and all the hurt and misunderstandings, and dare one say ignorance about those topics that today are so much a part of anti-Semitism?
Let me tackle this in the space and time that we have, so it's not going to be too lengthy. I think the theme that we've learned as Jews and that the Blacks have learned, and that what the movie called out, was if we ignore the elephant in the room, which is more hurtful or which is more dangerous, to ignore it or to tackle it. If there's facts, there's facts, and let's figure it out. If we're coming from the intent of how do we solve for something or improve upon something, then we'll get through it, because the truth of the matter is it's there already. And so what I would throw at all of us is, which is more dangerous, to let the elephant stay uninvited or to get to know about it more?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because one of the things that, I appreciate about us and growing comfortable with each other allows you to have more candid conversations. And sometimes that, so some of the programs, for example, we focus on spending time with each other. The more time Lisa and I spent with each other, the less problem I have with just being very candid with her and she with me. And I think that familiarity is something that's necessary, so that, and we didn't start off on I honestly wish we had Shari's, literally Shari's film should be mandatory. Literally, it should be mandatory. Watch this and then you can talk to me, because we worked for years to get where Shari's film took people in 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because this is not an easy thing. This is something that's taken generations and centuries to achieve. And so it's not something that someone's going to flip a switch. It's not something that someone's going to say, "Oh, I have a great idea. Let's make, sausages or something," and everybody's, going to be like, "Oh, this is great. This has all worked, and we'll sing a song and everything will be fine." Like, that's not going to happen. This is far too complex an equation. This is far too complex a scenario for any one scenario. It's a multi-generational scenario. We're going to have to do some things and just wait.
Yes.
Please,
Shari Frank, who is Congressman Lewis's soul sister, so, when people ask her about Black-Jewish relations, you know what she says? You have to have relations. Like, it's not about showing up. It's not about showing up on Martin Luther King Day. The temple shows up, and no, it's about what got us this far are real relationships. I mean, what people would be blown away about was when Rabbi Saperstein told me about his father. I think at his funeral was Stokely Carmichael. Like, huh? Like, he not only did Rabbi Saperstein like go to Selma, he stayed after in Selma, he worked after in Selma, and him and Stokely Carmichael, he tells a joke that I didn't put in the film because I didn't want it to be taken the wrong way. But he tells a joke that he said to Stokely Carmichael something, "If I were in your shoes, I don't know if I could remain nonviolent," something like that. Kind of, But I mean, these were real relationships, and the relationships that continued, like a Shari Frank, like a John Lewis, they're real relationships. They're not, And so I think we have to break down these barriers and. And we have enough in common while we do have differences, and we could spend hours talking about other elephants in the room or whatever. There's enough we need to work on together. We have a shared history, and we've got a long way to go for America to be what it was promised to be. And I feel honored. I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Clarence B. Jones, who basically I met at the Charles Wright Museum in Detroit. So you can imagine, as a Jewish woman in an African-American museum, hearing a professor from that Claiborne Carson from Stanford chose to represent Dr. King's legacy, talking about how Dr. King had said to him, that I know you, Clarence, will remind, our people of the 24/7 commitment of our Jewish brothers to our struggle. And that, with everything he has to do, he's the head of a nonviolence program now at the University of San Francisco, with everything going on in the Black community, that he took it upon himself to just lend himself to make sure he honored Dr. King's request. So,
well, I'm going to perhaps close this out by saying thank you for your diligence. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your vision, your creativity, your art, and your passion.
Thanks. Thank you so
beautifully
much.
told. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well
and
done.
I know it's hard to get on this whole thing, but this was really worth it. I'm so thankful.
Thank you, Shari, for being diligent. You tried hard. I was with you earlier.
Yes, the audience doesn't know that we had some technical difficulties today, and that's why we're all like a little bit crazy tonight. But we are really,
and we appreciate you and how hard you worked and your patience with all of us today, and your calmness kept us all calm. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. Well, I just wanted to thank all of our panelists, Shari, James, Blaine, who's off screen, and Lisa. Thank you all for being honest, and speaking openly about how you feel about being part of the Black Jewish Alliance, and Shari, just all of the work that went into bringing this to the public. It really is, an expression of tikkun olam on your part. I don't know if you answered this earlier. I stepped away for a moment, but just, why you chose to, devote years and years of your life to this. I'm thrilled and so thankful to you that you did. But that was just my question, is just, what motivated you to stick through this and make sure that this came out into the world? And did you answer that? I'm sorry.
I think in part, but I think I just did to a degree, that I developed a true friendship with Dr. Clarence B. Jones. And after I met him in Detroit, President Obama was the president, and Clarence was honored at the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts in honor of Martin Luther King, and the Obamas were there. And I don't know, he invited me, I think I was one of 20, but hearing him speak at the Kennedy Center, and he was speaking about his own personal story and the Black experience in America and civil rights and Dr. King, but he also talked about the Jewish people there too. And I thought, you know what? How could I not work to tell this story? And he gave me an entree into Reverend C.T. Vivian and Ambassador Young and Harry Belafonte, like, and
Wow.
and it was all there, so I could interview them. But this isn't, it's not at the forefront of what they're doing, right now. They had a lot going on, but yet for me to at least get their memories was very important. And now more than ever, I think, we need to work together. There's so much we can do together. And I think it makes you feel just like a more, soulful human being when you can work across the community to make the world a better place. So if I contribute a little bit, I'm happy.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make one recommendation to the audience. One of the books that I'm reading right now to better educate myself is How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I think this book, just like this movie, is just an incredible primer to understanding, the difference between anti-racism and the difference between assimilationists and segregationists and what it means to be each of these things. And also just this understanding that you're striving to be anti-racist, not to become anti-racist. There's no opposite to racism other than anti-racism. There's no such thing as being a non-racist. That was one of the key lessons I learned from this book. But the book is incredible, and the stories in this book, the history, the perspectives that are offered, like if you pair that book with this movie, you really get a fine understanding of where we are and where we need to go. So as audience members, if you have time to read this book, I don't think you would be disappointed. So thank you all again for joining us, and please join us again next week, same time, same place. We have the film Joaquin Prince, I Shall Not Be Silent, and he was in this film, and you can learn more about him and his alliance with Martin Luther King. And beautiful cat, James. I'm a huge cat fan. I love when people bring the cats in.
Oh, this is my Zoe.
It's a great way.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
To be
Have
continued.
a good night. Yes, to be
Thank
continued.
you. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone. Thanks to the audience as well for the questions and
Thank
participation.
you. Thank you so much.
Do we just hang up now?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm turning everybody off.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
To be continued. James, thank you so much. I'd love to.
Olivia, can you connect Shari and I?
I can, because in order to turn the whole event off, you'll be off as well.
I mean, just send us an
But
email.
yeah, of course I will. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Okay. All right. Thank you. Good night.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
guys.
much. Thank you.
Bye.